are these people?
So, so as you guys know, if you follow, if you care about the royals or like the royals, I don't, even though I am British, believe it or not.
British.
Um, um, so King Charles is now the monarch of the British Empire, and actually, since the Queen's death, there's been more talks in the UK regarding, the royals and and their role in history in terms of the Atlantic slave trade. And King Charles has said, from what I understand, since the summer, that he supports the idea of a study in terms of the implications of the Atlantic slave trade to, in our case, Black people in the UK and by extension the Caribbean. So there was a BBC report on this, I believe at the time, 3 weeks ago. So just to kind of give a little I wouldn't say reminder, but just a little recap of what was said back then in terms of what he said over the summer. And then we have some updates that was published in The Guardian, I believe, last week. So let's go to this clip, and thank you for taking us back in time, just in case. I'm sure it's going to get... Well, actually, since it's on this channel, we don't have to worry about monetization.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, let's see. Let's check out this BBC clip.
Now, Buckingham Palace says it's cooperating with an independent study into the links between the British monarchy and the slave trade in the 17th and 18th
I don't hear
centuries.
Sound.
The research...
You don't hear sound? Oh.
No.
This thing sometimes. Hold on. This is easy to fix. No, that's not what I want. I want this one. There we go.
Says it's cooperating with an independent study into the links between the British monarchy and the slave trade in the 17th and 18th centuries. The research is being carried out by the University of Manchester with historic royal palaces. Full access will be granted to the royal archives, with the study expected to be completed in 2026. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell explains just how significant this is for the royal family.
Well, it's clearly a sensitive and important issue, and this study, I gather, started in October, just 1 month after the new king came to the throne in September. It's not expected to report until 2026, and it is in the hands of a researcher at the University of Manchester who has experience in this field. And as you mentioned, Buckingham Palace is making both the Royal Archives and the Royal Collection completely accessible to the researchers. Both the King and the Prince of Wales have expressed their profound sorrow at the implications and impact of the slave trade in centuries gone by. The King, as Prince of Wales, did so at the heads of government meeting at the Commonwealth Conference in Rwanda last year, when he talked about his personal sorrow. I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many. And the Prince of Wales expressed similar sentiments during a visit to the Caribbean last year. So it is clearly important for the British monarchy to be seen to be addressing this issue, the transatlantic slave trade in which Britain participated in the late 17th and 18th centuries, albeit that Britain was then at the forefront of banning the international slave trade. But they want to get to the detail of the extent, if any, of any investments by former British monarchs in slave trading companies and whatever other implications there may be.
Nicholas, you mentioned investments there. There's often talk about reparations that are paid to people who've been influenced and affected by the slave trade. Is that a conversation you think the British monarchy might have?
There's no information about that. I think that it will certainly be something that will be in their minds, but I think that they want to understand fully and completely the extent of any involvement by former British monarchs, by the royal household in this trade, before deciding how to respond to whatever information may come forward. So there is certainly no suggestion at this stage of reparations, but I think that they want fully to understand what the implications, what the involvement, if any, was.
Nicholas, it's been a tumultuous few years for the British monarchy. Obviously, the death of the Queen was one big event, but we've also had events like losing Barbados as part of the Commonwealth, really bringing the question in of the future of the British monarchy. What does this tell us about the future of royal life?
I don't think it tells us anything at all. I mean, there is no question about the future of the British monarchy, certainly in the United Kingdom context, but clearly with the change of reign, the transition to Charles III, there will be questions being asked around those countries, 14 other countries which have the British head of state as their head of state. And again, Charles made it absolutely clear at the Commonwealth Conference in Rwanda last year that each country must make its own decision. And in a democratic context, that will be completely understood by Buckingham Palace, by him, if other democratic countries decide that they want to break away and cease to be monarchies, constitutional monarchies, and if they feel that they wish now to become republics.
Yes. Done now.
Nicholas Witchell there, our royal correspondent.
Bye, Nicholas.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
So, yeah, we talked about this when DJ Joe Nice was here. I think there was definitely more talk about reparations since the Queen's passing. We also kind of talked about the idea of, we talked a little bit about reparations on this show before.
A little bit.
A little bit. Probably not too much in depth. I don't claim to be an expert on it. But as a Black immigrant, I do have thoughts regarding reparations in terms of how we think of it. But as the report goes, as I said, King Charles, sorry, gotta put respect, well, whatever, has been open to a study regarding the royals' role in the Atlantic slave trade. To my knowledge, he has not said the word reparations. But again, that, as I said, that clip was produced 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
As of last week, we have a little update. So if you want to go to the article, I think a couple of people were mentioning Zaina. If you're from the UK, shout out to you. You might be able to help me out with this. But this is from The Guardian. She mentioned actually in the chat that they've been attacking the royals, especially regarding the coronation that's happening this weekend. Look, I have some thoughts about that, but I think if anything, they deserve to get as much hate, the royals, as much hate as they do. But according to, as written by David Cohn and Rachel Hall, direct ancestors of Prince King Charles owned slave plantations, documents reveal. So direct as in he has family members, ancestry to where he is linked to owning slaves. As if that's any surprise to any of us.
Right.
But in this article, nope.
Yep.
They write, direct ancestors of King Charles III and the royal family brought and exploited enslaved people on tobacco plantations in Virginia, according to new research shared with The Guardian. A document discovered in archives reveals that a direct ancestor of the king was involved in buying at least 200 enslaved people from a Royal African Company in 1686. The document instructs a ship's captain to deliver the enslaved Africans to Edward Portos?
Close enough. Portos. Yeah.
Portos, I guess is how you say. A tobacco plantation owner in Virginia, and 2 other men. Portos' son, Robert, inherited his father's estate before moving his family to England. in 1720. Later, a direct descendant, Francis Smith, married the aristocrat Claude Bowes-Lyon. Their granddaughter was Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the late Queen Mother.
Yeah.
The documents establishing these royal roots were found by the researcher Desiree Baptiste while investigating links between the Church of England and enslavers in Virginia for a play she has written.
Okay.
Move. Thank you. The revelation follows the Guardian's publication of a document earlier this month that linked the slave trader Edward Colson to the British monarchy. The latest discovery, which Baptiste made deep in the RAC archives, reveals a direct line up the Windsor family tree to the trafficking of enslaved Africans. The RAC, which traded almost 180,000 enslaved people, was granted royal charters by successive English kings.
Yep.
In the newly published document, senior RAC officials described themselves as your loving friends, instructing the captain of a ship to deliver Negroes to Edward Potose. You are with your first opportunity of wind and weather that God shall send after receipt hereof to set sail out of the river of Thames on the ship of Speedwell and make the best of your way to James Island on the river of Gambia, the instructions stated. It added, our said agent to put aboard the ship 200 Negroes and as many more as he shall get ready and the ship can conveniently carry, and then proceed to Potomac River in Maryland and deliver them to Mr. Edward Potose, Mr. Christopher Robinson, and Mr. Richard Garnier. The will of Edward Potose, another document examined by Baptiste, referred to Negroes who he left to his son Robert. Edward Potose also left to his wife Margaret, my Negro girl, Cumba. Virginia is a landmark state in the history of U.S. slavery because of the infamous landing of enslaved African people at Jamestown in 1619. Laws developed in the state to maintain slavery and crush uprisings, including whipping and dismembering people by cutting off a foot. A study of these laws states that a slave giving false evidence would receive his 39 lashes and then have his ears nailed to the pillory for half an hour, after which they would be cut off. Can you zoom out?
Unzoom, yeah.
An uprising by enslaved people in 1663 in Gloucester County, where Potose was based, was mercilessly put down, according to an account by the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Several bloody heads were dangled from local chimney tops as a gruesome warning to others. Earlier this month, in response to the Guardian's reporting, Charles signaled for the first time his support for research into the links between the British monarchy and the transatlantic slave trade. A Buckingham Palace spokesman said that at the time that Charles took profoundly seriously the issue of slavery, which he has described as an appalling atrocity. Support for the research was part of Charles's process of deepening his understanding of slavery's enduring impact, the spokesperson said, which had continued with vigor and determination since his accession. Race equality and reparations campaigners told The Guardian that while they mostly welcomed the support for research, they believe Charles must go further and acknowledge the established history now. A palace spokesperson said in response to a question about the Windsor family's heritage in Virginia that they were unable to comment until after the coronation, which is, as I said, takes place this weekend.
Yeah.
A spokesperson explained that the media operation was under intense pressure dealing with global interest in the coronation. However, last week, the Bishop of London, Sarah Mulhaley, issued an apology relating to the same Virginia family. A son of Robert Potose by second marriage, a lineage separate from the royal family, was Bell B. Potose, who was Bishop of London for 22 years from 1787.
Bell Biv
In
DeVoe?
January...
Bell Biv DeVoe, he said?
Yeah, Potose.
Okay.
In January, Fulham... In January, I'm sure I'm getting that name wrong, but...
no, Bell Biv DeVoe, you missed it. Bell Biv, like poison.
Okay.
Anyway.
In January, Fulham Palace Trust, which maintains the historic London Bishop's residence, published research on the Potose plantations. It acknowledged that Bishop Potose and a brother inherited their father's large Virginia estate and continued to profit from it as absentee plantation owners and enslavers.
Yep.
Mulhaley marked the opening of a new Fulham Palace exhibition on transatlantic slavery and resistance by issuing an apology relating in part to Potose. I am profoundly sorry for the harm that was inflicted by my predecessors through their involvement with the transatlantic slave trade, Mulhaley said in a statement. It continues to be a source of great shame to us as a diocese. In a play that Baptiste developed from her historical research, the lead character calls on Charles to apologize for the monarchy's institutional and family involvement in transatlantic slavery. The Royal African Company document shows the current king's direct ancestor trafficking newly arrived Africans and profiting from the confiscated lives of enslaved people, like the Negro girl combo left in Edward's will, Baptiste said. This means the royal links to slavery are more than just institutional, they are in their family heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Trevor Bombard, the director of the Wilberforce Institute for the Study of Slavery and Emancipation at the University of Hull, said, Charles has given an encouraging response to further research, and this new information shows that further research should be done, showing how extensive the links are of the royal family, aristocracy, and all parts of Britain to slavery.
Gotcha.
Thoughts or I share?
I mean, not surprising, seeing as how they, the Dutch East India Company was British, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was Dutch, but through British tradesmen and, you know, partially the British Navy as well, you know? I mean, they ruled the waves for long enough, you know? So, I mean, you're talking over that, you know, what is it, 200 years almost? Like, you know, like how much is Britain not only just at the, like, exploitation of the global south alone, but with actual slavery, they definitely had a hand in it, especially the royal family. And we'd be amiss to talk about right now with World Press Freedom Day. Who do they still have locked up in Belmarsh? You know, like
Julian Assange.
Right. So, you know, this seems like a lot of, like, it's similar to how, you know, recently Biden was like, oh yeah, press freedom, it's important. It's the same thing as like them saying, sorry, slavery is an important topic we need to talk about. You know, to me, it's just lip service, you know?
Yeah. So a couple of things with this. So, I mean, this isn't a surprise, but this, as I said earlier, it's pretty much confirmed, you know, that the royal family has ties to slavery. Number one, the fact, you know, Charles, well, as much as I don't want to give King Charles credit, like, I do have to admit, at least he acknowledges the idea for research, and there's been some movement on that, unlike over here where we have talked about like research for reparations for God knows how long. Yeah. Especially in the last election, that everyone and their mother talked about the idea of research. We haven't done it. So, you know, so I think really, honestly, the idea that, you know, and I'm going to get hate on this, but I don't care. But the idea of like FBAs and ADOS, you know, I'm not talking about this, I think is really a disservice, because you can argue, you know, all you want in terms of like, oh, like reparations is something that's specific to America. Well, as we read, you know, these slaves from Africa having ties to the British monarchy ended up where? In Virginia. Yeah. And many of those slaves, you know, are ancestors of, you know, African Americans here. So the idea of just having reparations be synonymous with an American issue, I think is just stupid. You know, if you're going to go after our American government, you should just easily, if not more so, go after Europe as well, more so. because they were the ones who initially, brought slaves over before America even became a country. So, so the idea that we're just talking about this, and I've said this before, like a lot of conversations I've had with African Americans has been, oh, we support you, me, in terms of you standing by us in terms of reparations, but if you want to work for reparations in context of, in terms of me, growing up in UK with Caribbean parents, handle that among your own, and we'll take care of our issues here. Whereas, again, as you could see, they're linked in terms of the people who send us here and like the ancestry that, African Americans had probably with these 200 slaves by way of the British. And again, this was done before, America got its independence. The idea that African Americans are not talking about this story, I think is very telling.
Not only are they not answering for this because they feel like they don't have any part of it, but they're also not answering for the Windrush Act, which they were definitely a part of, which definitely was affecting, not only ADOS, but specifically African Americans that moved there,
Right.
So
kind of going back to what I was saying, at least, Charles has acknowledged a need for a study. That being said, the idea that, and I'm sure he's getting a lot of pressure in terms of saying, take some action. I'm sure he's going to divot and dodge the idea of saying reparations at all. And, so I think this is more of a time, especially now that, as I said, his coronation is over the weekend, that there should be a larger call for that, and not just exclusively to British blacks and black people who live in the Caribbean, especially if they're islands that are part of the Commonwealth, of the UK Commonwealth. That also should come from Americans as well, in terms of, we want to make sure that we're a little more having some solidarity in terms of, having this issue elevated to where it's not just limited to what we talk about in America. We've talked about how the idea of reparations is being talked about among states, but it's going nowhere on the federal level. And the idea that, as we reported before, CARICOM has a list of demands regarding reparations. We talked about that before. We talked about the idea of how the Dutch have basically said sorry, which is not, which residents in the Netherlands Antilles, in the West Indies, they're not having it. They're like, no, we actually want more than just lip service.
Suriname.
Suriname, and Curacao, and Aruba, like those ABC islands. But then, like, now I can imagine, especially given this report, there should be screaming, like, and so honestly, what I would love to see, I'm sure it's probably not going to happen, but over the weekend, like, protesting in regards to, the idea of Black people getting reparations. That's what really should, in my mind, that's what really should be happening, this weekend as the king is getting coronated. But, but again, like, this is a story that no one's going to talk about, at least here, or at least in terms of elevating the issue of reparations. And I think it's important. So that's why I felt like it was important to kind of talk about this, even though, like, the idea of reparations is kind of like an issue that no one's really talking about here. But just the idea to show that it's not just limited just to an African American ideal. This is a global ideal in terms of how Black people, in general, need to respond in terms of the solidarity that we need to have to elevate this issue, especially since, like, those slaves are ancestors of current people who are living in America today. It wasn't American, all intents and purposes, did not exist, at that point. It was,
I say we go Game of Thrones rules and trial by combat. King Charles. I think that's okay. You know, like we'll go old school duel and see how things work out. But